My aunt once told me that traveling helps you find yourself. What she never mentioned was how it could lead you straight to hell. I'm Danny Jackson, 23, college diploma still fresh enough to smell the ink. For months, I'd wandered Europe with a backpack that smelled of 3 different hostels' laundry soap and kebab grease ground into the straps. Back home, my father, Dr. Jackson, whose framed physics papers lined our hallway like family portraits, had always set an extra place at the dinner table. One for him, one for me, and one for the equations that kept him company through midnight hours. He barely looked up the day I traded calculus textbooks for literature, when I stopped bringing home science fair ribbons and started filling notebooks with stories instead. I packed a single bag and left last winter, collecting train tickets instead of the approving nods I never received, marking my existence in hostel logbooks and passport stamps. So just like that, I found myself on a forgotten stop near the northern Slovenian border. I'd arrived earlier on a bus with seats patched with duct tape, hoping to catch any southbound train to Trieste or beyond. Instead, I found myself on an abandoned platform where even the pigeons had given up roosting years ago. Raskovan Station looked like something from a war documentary. The ticket window had been boarded up so long that vines had claimed it. The only functioning piece was a station clock, frozen at 9:17. But leaving this place on foot meant stumbling through miles of pine forest with no guarantee of shelter. So I chose to wait for the first best ride. If only I knew where that ride would take me. I felt it before I heard it. A sudden tremor through the wooden slats beneath me. Then, a single yellow headlight pierced through the night fog. Behind it formed the silhouette of a locomotive that belonged in a black and white photograph, its coal-black form materializing from the mist as if sketched by an invisible hand. I blinked hard, rubbed my eyes. There shouldn't have been any arrivals for a while. At midnight, even most main stations in Ljubljana stood empty, except for sleeping drunks. But the train rumbled closer, and when it finally stopped, I could make out faded lettering along its side. Night Nocturne Express. Footsteps echoed on the platform as a tall figure emerged from beside the engine. He wore a midnight blue uniform with silver buttons and a cap pulled low over eyes that seemed to reflect nothing. Before I could stammer a question, he extended a white-gloved hand. Between his fingers appeared a small yellow ticket and a folded slip of paper, which he handed to me. "Good evening, Mr. Jackson," he said. "We've been waiting for you. How do you know who I am?" I managed, my voice cracking. He offered no answer. Instead, he tipped his cap and gestured toward the open train door, where warm light spilled onto the platform. My feet moved before my brain had decided, perhaps from exhaustion, perhaps from curiosity, perhaps because the alternative was another 6 hours on that bench. As I climbed aboard the train, with the doors closing behind me, I unfolded the paper the conductor had given me and read the typed message. 1. Never accept the conductor's second request. For those who do, even the compartments of your own mind become corridors of the train. 2. Count the rows of mirrors, but never stop at the 9th. Pause at that reflection too long, and your doppelganger may step out while you remain trapped. 3. Always greet the phantom merchant. If you neglect to speak first, he'll take interest in the very organs of your soul and peddle them to horrors drifting in the lampless aisles. 4. Do not enter the car with white drapes alone, because the hush of those curtains is a lullaby for the damned, weaving your essence into their silent folds one soft thread at a time. 5. Return any found item that isn't yours. When you keep what others lost, you awaken them from slumber, and the hungry are eager to reclaim far more than possessions. 6. During the silent hour, shut your eyes. In that hush, unseen watchers roam, eager to claim any gaze that dares linger on their unformed shapes. Then below, in bold letters, if you break these rules, we are not responsible for the consequences. I nearly laughed, thinking it must be some elaborate prank, but the corridor stretched before me, empty and silent, and my stomach knotted as I tucked the note into my pocket. That's how my night began. drawn into a train absent from every schedule, welcomed by a conductor who knew my name without asking. Walking down the train's dim corridor, the first passenger car greeted me with a door that whined like an old dog being forced awake. Inside, 3 passengers sat scattered about like survivors of some forgotten disaster. A young woman my age had tucked herself against a window. Across from her slouched a middle-aged man in a wrinkled vest and loosened tie, fingers tapping his knee with restless rhythm. Farther down stood a teenage boy in a hoodie so worn the university logo had faded to ghostly outlines, his hands looking through the overhead luggage rack. The carriage smelled like my grandmother's attic. Mothballs and dust settled into fabric that had absorbed decades of cigarette smoke and perfume. Hi. Do you mind if I sit?" My voice bounced off the walls. The older man flicked his eyes at me, but the young woman offered a smile and nodded toward the empty space beside her. "I'm Danny," I said, sliding into the seat across from the man and woman. "Emma," she replied. "Dr. Carter," the man offered, clipping each syllable like he was saving words for later. The boy behind us slammed an overhead compartment with a bang that made me flinch. "I'm Milo," he said, his voice cracking. Though he couldn't have been more than 16, the skin around his eyes had the tight look of someone who'd aged a decade overnight. We sat in silence until Emma pointed at the crumpled paper I still clutched. "Did you also get the rules?" I nodded. "Picked it up when I boarded. Weird, right? Like something from an escape room." Milo let out a laugh. "Weird doesn't begin to cover it." Dr. Carter tugged at his tie, pulling it down an inch before immediately tightening it again. "Superstitious nonsense," he said. "I've traveled half the globe. There's always some local legend about trains to nowhere. Delhi has one. Kyoto too. They feed on gullible tourists with cameras and too much cash." But despite his dismissal, his fingers kept returning to that tie. "Is that why you're here, Dr. Carter?" Emma asked, irritated. "For a tourist attraction?" His brown eyes flicked to her. "I'm here on business in Eastern Europe. Caught the wrong connection, apparently. Though I'd wager this is some elaborate scam engineered by locals to separate fools from their money." Milo scoffed. "Sure. Let's see if it still feels like a stunt when we hit the next phantom stop and the walls start bleeding." I cleared my throat. "I take it that none of you intended to get on the night nocturne either." Emma shook her head. "It's my second time," she said, hugging her knees tighter. "I know it sounds crazy, but it picked me up last year in Barcelona. I made it out alive, thought I'd escaped for good. Then I found it again in Marseille 2 days ago. Now here I am." Her words sent a chill through me. "Are you saying this thing hunts people? Like a predator?" "Not people," Emma said, her gaze fixed on something beyond the glass. "It hunts a specific kind of emptiness. The kind that sits in your chest at 3 a.m. when everyone you know is asleep. The hollow that echoes when you call into it." Carter snorted. "Poetic nonsense. Next you'll be telling us it feeds on dreams and lost hopes. Do you think I'd make this up?" she snapped. "You think I'd choose to be back here? You have no idea what I've seen on this train." Her fist clenched around a small charm bracelet. Milo moved to an empty seat. "So what are these rules for? Are they supposed to protect us or trap us?" "A bit of both," Emma answered. "Last time I ignored them. I saw things. The cost." She didn't finish, turning instead to stare out the window. Suddenly the train jolted sharply. My teeth clicked together painfully and the overhead lights flickered. Once, twice. That's when I noticed something moving beneath Carter's seat. A small shape shifting in shadow. He jerked his leg away with a sound like someone had stepped on his throat. A faint metallic jingle followed. Bending down, I saw a silver watch on the floor, its case engraved with patterns that reminded me of the Celtic knots my art teacher once showed us. Except these seemed to shift and flow whenever I blinked. For a bizarre moment, its second hand appeared to tick backward, counting down time already spent. Carter snatched it up before I could reach for it. "A watch," he said, turning it over in his hands, his thumb stroking the metal. Rule number 5 flashed in my mind. "Return any found item that isn't yours." I opened my mouth to warn him, but the train gave another violent shudder. Milo toppled into the aisle, catching himself against a seat. Emma's fabric suitcase tipped over, spilling postcards and a half-eaten Mars bar. "Put it back," Emma whispered, eyes fixed on the watch. "Please." Carter cast her an angry look. "It's hardly theft if it's on the floor and no one claims it." But the way he slipped the watch into his vest pocket felt wrong. "What could possibly go wrong now?" I muttered. A hush settled over our group as we remembered the rule's warning about awakening those who lost items on the train. "So what happened to you the first time?" I finally asked Emma quietly. She shifted closer. "I followed the rules, mostly, but I saw others who didn't. There was a woman from Portugal who accepted the conductor's second ticket punch. She changed, started speaking in voices that bubbled up from somewhere deep inside her, voices that squirmed like worms in her throat. By dawn, she was gone, but sometimes I hear her whispers when I'm alone in my apartment, coming through the heating vents. And you? How did you get off the train?" I reached a station at sunrise. The door opened. "I stepped out," she said simply, though her fingers picking at a loose thread on her jeans told me there was more buried in those words. Her other hand kept returning to the silver key charm, turning it back and forth. Milo had been listening. "I don't think the train lets everyone off so easily." "And what makes you say that?" Dr. Carter interrupted, suddenly interested. Milo shifted, shoulders hunching. "Just a feeling." His sleeve rode up, revealing a burn scar on his wrist shaped exactly like a handprint. But Emma looked at him with recognition. "You've heard stories, haven't you? Before you ever got on this train." "My brother," Milo said after a moment, yanking his sleeve down. "He rode this train 5 years ago. He came back, different, started sleep-talking about mirrors and merchants and white curtains. He'd wake up screaming that his reflection was watching him through the bathroom mirror. Said it blinked when he didn't. He never recovered. That's why I'm here. I'm trying to understand what happened to him. The night nocturne exists between places, between heartbeats," Emma said softly. "The landscape outside isn't anywhere you could find on Google Maps or in an atlas. We're in its territory now, like mice that wandered into a snake's burrow. Outside, the darkness had thickened, and for the first time since boarding, real fear gripped me as I realized what I had gotten myself into. What if this train had left our reality altogether? "We need to keep moving," Emma said suddenly, springing to her feet. "Sitting in one place too long attracts attention." She didn't explain what kind of attention, but the way her eyes darted to the shadows made my skin prickle. So we stepped into the corridor, walking single file between walls that seemed to inch closer with each step. The amber lights overhead sputtered, briefly revealing tarnished mirrors lining the passage. Their frames were carved with faces, not the cherubs you'd find in antique shops, but twisted things with too wide mouths and horns curling from temples, their wooden eyes seeming to swivel as we passed. Rule number 2 flashed in my mind. Count the rows of mirrors, but never stop at the 9th. Emma's fingers dug into my elbow. "Don't stare," she whispered. "Last time, a businessman from Munich got transfixed by these mirrors. When we found him, he was different." "Different how?" I asked, my own reflection fractured across a dozen tarnished surfaces. His reflection was still moving when he wasn't, scratching its nose while his hand lay still, blinking when his eyes were open. Then he started, following himself, as if his own shadow was always a step behind. By morning, the reflection was leading. He was the follower, jerking like a puppet whose strings were being yanked by clumsy hands. As we hurried past the mirrors, making sure to count them one by one, the corridor stretched impossibly long. A football field's worth of hallway in a train that had looked barely 5 cars long from outside. The nocturne seemed to fold space upon itself, creating rooms where none should exist. Our group stumbled into a lounge area furnished with chairs whose stuffing leaked from split seams. In that lounge, a stooped figure awaited us, wrapped in a cloak patched with scraps of fabric that didn't match, pushing a brass cart that gleamed despite the dim light. This must be the Phantom Merchant. Rule number 3 echoed in my head. Always greet him. He turned his hooded head our way, face hidden in shadow. "Good evening, travelers," he hissed. "What do you need in these lonely hours?" Despite my caution, I felt a strange pull towards him, like the urge to peek inside a stranger's medicine cabinet. But Milo found his voice first. "Hello?" he said, chin tilting up in false confidence. "What are you selling?" The merchant's gloved hand, 5 fingers plus something extra that wiggled beneath the cloth, caressed items beneath a velvet cloth. Answers, peace, acceptance, reunions with the dearly departed. His fingers paused over crystal vials containing swirling mist, a bone-handled dagger with stains worked into the grooves, and a child's music box painted with faded circus scenes. Emma visibly trembled, backing away from the cart. Dr. Carter narrowed his eyes, his hand patting the watch in his pocket like a nervous tick. "Greetings," the rest of our group said quickly. "We're only passing through." The merchant inclined his head with a creak like a door hinge. "For now. But the train loves those who wander with empty hearts. Should you desire to fill that emptiness, I am ever at your service." His voice bypassed my ears entirely, speaking directly to the space behind my ribs that had been there since Mom walked out on my 10th birthday. His words scraped a raw nerve, my desperate, pathetic hunger for belonging that followed me across countries like a stray dog. "None of us are buying tonight," Dr. Carter snapped. The merchant paused. "As you wish." His voice dropped to a whisper. "But I see the grief you clutch like a security blanket, Dr. Carter. How about trading it for something more productive?" "Don't speak to me as if," Carter began, color rising in his cheeks. "Careful," Emma warned, stepping between them. Ignoring her, the merchant revealed a scuffed medical textbook with yellowed pages, open to a diagram of a broken human heart. "A father who never quite saw you," he murmured, "or a child you could not save. Which is it that festers in your mind like an infected splinter?" Carter's expression tightened. "You know nothing about me. Yet I know you are torn by regrets," the merchant pressed. "Perhaps you yearn for a chance to undo a mistake." The merchant's fingers moved to a brass timepiece similar to the watch in Carter's pocket. The captain always loved such instruments of precision. "The captain?" I found myself asking. The merchant's hood tilted. "All vessels require a master, Mr. Jackson. Even those that traverse the darkness between what is and what might have been." The edge of a smile showed beneath his hood. Emma bristled. "Rule number 3, she said, voice ringing with forced confidence. "We greet you, merchant, but we never buy." "Very well," the merchant said finally. "I'll leave you to your illusions of restraint." He bowed once more, then shuffled away with his squeaking cart. We collapsed into chairs in the lounge, tension draining from us. Dr. Carter looked rattled, though he tried to hide it. "You're a medical doctor?" I ventured, noting how his fingers continually returned to the watch pocket. He nodded curtly. "Cardiac surgeon. At least I used to be." He rubbed a faint scar on his index finger. "Used to be?" Milo echoed. Carter's expression darkened. "I no longer practice. Not after." He trailed off, then forced a bitter smile. "Let's just say some errors can't be undone, no matter how steady your hands are with a scalpel." "The merchant knew about it," Emma observed quietly. "About your regret." "The merchant knows nothing," Carter snapped, voice cracking. "He uses cold reading techniques the same as any carnival fortune teller." Emma leaned close. "He preys on our darkest wounds," she whispered. "The more we try to bury them, the more valuable they become to him. Whatever he sells has a price that is always too high. A finger, an eye, a memory of your first kiss." I nodded. My father's face flashed in my mind, stern disappointment behind wire-rimmed glasses when I chose literature over physics. Then the train rattled, a hollow groan echoing through the walls. Somewhere ahead, a hiss of steam escaped, followed by a distant squeal. A flicker of panic sparked in Emma's eyes. We're near the white drape's car, she said, voice tight. It's always close by, like a shark circling bloody water. I recalled rule number 4. Do not enter the car with white drapes alone. Behind us, the lounge door slid shut with an abrupt clang, sealing us in like specimens in a jar. With no other choice but to keep moving forward, as our group ventured deeper into the train, the lights dimmed with each step. The corridor squeezed inward until my shoulders nearly brushed both walls, leading us to a set of heavy double doors with chipped white paint. Milo hovered behind us. This place feels wrong, he whispered, like walking into someone else's nightmare. It's supposed to, Emma said quietly. These cars rearrange themselves based on what frightens us most. That's why it's different for me this time. Last year, this section looked like my childhood home. How convenient, Carter muttered, an explanation that conveniently cannot be disproven. But I noticed his eyes darting nervously to the shadows. This train can't possibly fit all these corridors, I said, trying to ground myself in logic. We've been walking for what feels like miles. The nocturne doesn't obey physical laws, Emma replied. It's bigger on the inside, much bigger. Like it creates spaces that don't belong in our world, folding reality like origami. She traced a finger along the floral wallpaper, and I swore it rippled beneath her touch. As Emma reached for the handle, turning it with careful precision, a blast of cold air greeted us, carrying a faint chemical smell. Beyond the doors, white drapes hung from ceiling to floor like frozen waterfalls, forming a maze of corridors that swayed slightly despite the lack of breeze. Rule number 4, Emma reminded us softly. No one goes in alone. If you find yourself separated, run back to the door you came through. It's all illusions in there, but illusions can sink their teeth into your mind like ticks, draining you dry while you're still walking around. We pressed onward together, the curtains brushing our arms. Partway through this fabric labyrinth, we stumbled into an open area with a tarnished chandelier hanging overhead. Beneath it sat a table draped in a white cloth, chairs arranged as if for a formal dinner party. Silver-domed plates dotted the tabletop. Let's keep going, Emma said, voice pulled taut. But curiosity nagged at Milo. He lifted one of the domes, then recoiled with a choked gasp. Underneath lay a single black feather, quivering as though freshly plucked. Gross, he muttered, dropping the dome with a clatter. Emma grabbed his hand, pulling him away with such force his sneakers squeaked against the floor. Don't touch anything else. The white drape's car fills itself with bait, like a spider decorating its web with false exits. Bait for what, I asked, instantly regretting the question. For people who want to be somewhere else so badly they'll follow any promise, no matter how impossible. Last time, my brother Marco thought he heard our father's voice calling from behind a curtain. Our father who'd been dead for 3 years. He went through a gap I couldn't see, like he was walking through a wall. I never found him again. Her voice broke, eyes glistening with tears. Carter bent toward the feather through the glass dome. Fascinating. This appears to be a raven's feather, though unusually large for the species. The iridescence suggests... Doctor, Emma began, exasperation hardening her voice. Just then, a door at the far end clicked open. In walked a tall woman in a stylish dark green coat with brass buttons, her black hair swept into a bun. Her eyes flicked over us with the efficiency of someone counting inventory. Travelers, she said, forcing a thin smile that never reached those dark eyes. You're not illusions, are you? The drapes like to conjure companions to lure the lonely. Her voice carried a trace of an Eastern European accent. We exchanged wary looks. Carter stepped forward. We're flesh and blood. Who are you? She inclined her head. My name is Astrid. I boarded in Hungary. Or perhaps that was centuries ago. Time is peculiar on this train, stretching like taffy in some cars, compressed to nothing in others. Her gloved fingers tapped against her thigh in a strange rhythm. A half scoff escaped me before I could stop it. We're all dealing with the oddities here, but it's still the same night we boarded. Tuesday, December 3rd. Astrid's lips curved upward. Is it? I've lost track of how long I've wandered these compartments. The white drapes trapped me once, showed me illusions of everything I thought I wanted. My childhood home in Prague, my mother's cooking, the university position I'd dreamed of. I barely escaped when I realized the illusions were devouring me, one memory at a time. Devouring. Milo grimaced. Pieces of my identity, my memories. When I saw myself in a mirror, parts of my face were blank, smooth as eggshell. I almost gave them away willingly. The merchant was a constant presence, offering to help, for a price I didn't understand until later. A shadow crossed her features. I suspect this train recruits some of us to spread its horrors elsewhere, like a virus using a host. Did you see a young man? Emma asked suddenly, hope kindling in her voice. About my age, dark hair, with a birthmark shaped like Italy on his right temple. Her fingers clutched at her brother's key charm. Oh, Astrid said, her face going blank. I've seen so many faces. They blend together after a while like photographs left in rain. Emma's hope visibly dimmed. Astrid placed her hand on a tall chair. We should keep moving. The white drapes car rearranges itself when no one's looking. If we stay put, the path out of here might disappear, leaving us to wander in circles until we're too exhausted to resist what it offers. And with that, our group, now 5, pressed forward through the labyrinth of cloth. Each time we passed a swirl of curtains, I half expected to see something peering back from between the folds. Eventually, the curtains parted onto another corridor with peeling red wallpaper. We tumbled through, relief flooding us. But even as the heavy door slid shut behind us, I sensed an invisible eye on my back. Astrid moved ahead briskly. I noticed Dr. Carter studying her with narrowed eyes. Milo looked equally suspicious, staying close to Emma. Where do we go now? Milo asked, voice low. Astrid pointed down a corridor where old-fashioned torches cast pools of yellow light. The train's front car sometimes has a locked area with brass doors. If we can open it, we might find the engine. Maybe even a way to stop this nightmare. You can't seriously think we can stop the train, Emma said. Why not try? Astrid's question hung in the air. Because those who try to control the train end up becoming part of its machinery, Emma said darkly. I've seen it happen. A conductor tried last time, reached for the emergency brake. Next morning his uniform was empty, and a new pipe had appeared in the engine room, whistling in the exact pitch of his scream. A sudden ringing pierced the air. Carter stiffened, pulling the watch from his pocket. The timepiece glowed faintly with an inner light, ticking in double time. Is that watch working now? Milo frowned. This piece is unique, possibly reacting to electromagnetic interference from the train's systems. Carter cradled it in his palm. Astrid's gaze flicked to the watch. Or perhaps it's connected to the train's heartbeat. Some artifacts here feed on energies we can't explain. The captain's possessions always find their way back, they say. Like lost dogs with an unerring sense of home. The captain? I asked. The master of this vessel. Some say he was human once, long ago. A station master who lost his family and couldn't bear to leave the rails. Others believe he was never human at all, but something that found an empty shape to wear. Her tongue flicked over her lower lip, too quick, like a lizard tasting air. My stomach twisted into a knot, recalling how rule number 5 warned about found items. Carter had broken that rule already, but nothing had happened yet. Astrid drifted closer to Carter. May I see it? She asked, extending a slender hand. I don't think that's wise, Emma interjected, stepping between them. The fewer hands that touch it, the better. Things pass between people on this train, and not just objects. Carter hesitated, then slid it back into his pocket. It's safer with me. Astrid's mouth tightened momentarily. As you wish, Doctor. Though I might be able to help decipher its purpose. The engravings tell a story for those who know how to read them. And how would you know that? Milo asked suspiciously. Experience, she said simply. I've been on this train longer than any of you. Her coat shifted as she gestured, revealing a glimpse of what looked like another uniform beneath. midnight blue with silver buttons that match the conductor's outfit exactly. And yet you're still alive. Interesting, Emma observed, eyes narrowing. A tense silence stretched between them. I exchanged glances with Milo, sharing his uneasiness about Astrid. There was something too collected about her. We should keep moving, I suggested. Astrid nodded. By all means. Just remember, time runs differently here. Dawn might come in minutes, or never at all. The night nocturne keeps its own schedule, written in ink that no living eye can read. At that moment, a sharp chemical smell hit me like a slap, the same reek as the jars of frog specimens in high school biology. The stench thickened as we approached the next set of doors. A rusted plaque read, "Cargo hold, authorized personnel only." Astrid paused. "This is new. I've never seen a cargo car on the night nocturne before." Milo slid in beside her. "Maybe it's a shot at answers. Something must power this train besides black magic." "Magic," Carter repeated with scorn, but even he looked uneasy. Emma's hand found mine, her fingers cold. "Stay together," she murmured. "We can't risk splitting up, not here." We entered the car slowly, the door hinges complaining like an old man's knees. Dim bulbs revealed metal crates stacked along the walls, tied down with fraying canvas straps. Some crates had burst open, rusty nails protruding like broken teeth. Astrid moved forward with surprising confidence, crouching to investigate the labeling on one crate. There's no text, just symbols. She traced an etched spiral with her fingertip. I approached a crate where the lid had partially split, revealing rows of glass jars filled with murky yellowish liquid. Within one, something pale floated. A human hand severed cleanly at the wrist, fingers curled inward. "Jesus," I breathed, stumbling back, bile burning the back of my throat. Dr. Carter joined me. "These appear to be specimens, perhaps medical or scientific in nature." He adjusted his glasses, leaning closer than any sane person would. Milo pushed forward to see, then recoiled. "Those are people's body parts. What kind of train is this?" "One that collects more than passengers," Astrid said softly. "It harvests." Her eyes lingered on the jars with an unsettling hunger. I stepped around a puddle and approached a smaller crate. The inscription had been scratched into the wood. "Carpathian trophies." Beneath them, smaller letters spelled out, "Dreams of the Restless." A wooden box across from us creaked open an inch, then two. Something inside shifted with a soft, slithering noise. Suddenly, a silhouette emerged from behind a large crate, tall and gaunt as a scarecrow, wearing an old-fashioned porter's uniform with tarnished buttons. His face was pale, eyes clouded white. He reached for Carter with fingers that stretched too long from his hands. "Help. Me. Get. Free." The figure rasped, his voice like sandpaper on metal. We froze, stunned by the raw desperation in that voice. "Who are you?" Carter demanded. "I'm nobody," the figure rasped, swaying slightly. "I tried to stop the train. I couldn't." His milky gaze fixed on Carter's pocket. "Is that the captain's chronometer?" Thick, colorless drool connected his blue-tinged lips. "The captain's chronometer?" Emma repeated, shooting Carter a warning glance. The porter lurched forward, each step accompanied by grinding bones. "Return it," he hissed through stained teeth. "Belongs to the train, to him, or it'll cost your soul." Shadows moved in the corners of my vision. Dr. Carter clasped the watch protectively. "I'm not giving it to you," he snapped. "You're obviously delirious." An anguished moan erupted from the porter. "Then, the train will devour you." Blackish fluid seeped from his eyes, streaking his pale cheeks. Then, the overhead light snapped off, plunging us into darkness. Emma gasped, Milo cursed, and Astrid hissed in alarm. The stench of old metal and wet decay flooded my nostrils. I fumbled for my phone and switched on its flashlight. The beam cut through darkness, landing on the porter. He convulsed in a violent seizure that seemed to shake the floor. His body twisted in ways that made my stomach lurch. Knees bending backwards, and elbows rotating completely. The wet sound of snapping tendons and popping joints filled the air. The lights flickered back to life. The porter was gone, vanished completely, leaving only a smear of blackish fluid on the floor. We stood in stunned silence. Then Dr. Carter shoved past us, heading for the corridor door. "Enough of this nonsense," he muttered, though his voice wobbled. "We keep moving." But his face had drained of color. Emma followed close behind. "He's ignoring the rules," she whispered to me. "The watch might cost us everything." As we approached the far door, I noticed Astrid lingering beside one of the specimen jars, examining it with focused intensity. "Astrid?" I called. "We should stick together." She startled slightly, then turned with a forced smile. "Of course, just scientific curiosity." "What's your background?" I asked as we walked side by side. "Anthropology," she replied smoothly. "I was researching folklore about phantom trains when I found myself aboard one." "Talk about field research gone wrong," Milo snorted. Astrid's laugh was hollow. "Indeed, though I've learned more than I ever could in academia." We reached the cargo car's end, stepping onto a narrow platform that connected to the next carriage. The metal grate beneath our feet revealed tracks rushing by. The door ahead bore a sliding sign. "Maintenance section, no passengers." Lightning tore across the sky outside, briefly illuminating the silhouette of black pine forests in the distance. "If the watch belongs to the captain, maybe it's a key," Astrid murmured, hunger in her voice unmistakable. "Key to what?" I asked. She offered a cryptic half-smile. "To controlling the train, or being controlled by it. We'll see." I shivered, not liking the glint in her eyes. The watch was no mere trinket now. It was a potential weapon, or a link to the train's dark heart. Emma pulled me back by my sleeve. "Keep your eyes on Astrid. Something's not right about her." "You think she wants the watch?" "I think she's been on this train too long to be human anymore," Emma replied, eyes darting to ensure Astrid couldn't hear. "Did you notice how she never blinks? Not even once." I hadn't, but the observation settled in my gut like a heavy stone. "We need to stick together," I declared, watching Carter's back. "Trust no one completely, but don't isolate either. Isolation is what this place wants." Emma nodded, her eyes darting to where Carter patted his pocket. "He's our biggest liability right now. That watch is changing him, drawing the train's attention like a lightning rod." I thought of the porter's warning. "If we survive until dawn, what then?" "We get off," she said firmly. "All of us. No matter what we think we might gain by staying. No matter what the train promises us." As I looked at her determined expression, I wondered if she truly meant it, if she'd really leave without finding her brother. And I wondered what I might do, faced with a similar promise of fulfilling my own deepest longing. After prying open the maintenance door, we found a corridor, this time lined with dull metal walls. On the floor, there were smeared, greasy footprints, some human-sized, others disturbingly wide, and some shaped wrong, like hoof marks. Worst of all were the prints with too many toes, splayed like starfish. "Let's hurry," Emma muttered. "I hate this part of the train. Feels like walking through a slaughterhouse freezer." The corridor curved like a question mark, leading to a row of doors with peeling labels. Boiler room, electrical, crew quarters. A steady thrumming sound vibrated through the walls, pulsing with the rhythm of a massive heartbeat. Astrid tested each door with methodical precision. "No luck," she said. "We might need to break one." As she reached up, her sleeve rode back, and I noticed a strange mark on her wrist. A spiral identical to the symbols we'd seen on the cargo crates. Carter frowned. "Let's not resort to destruction yet. If we keep going, perhaps we'll find an unlocked path to the engine." "Why are you so eager to find the engine?" Emma asked, eyes narrowing. "You claimed this was all a hoax just hours ago, some tourist trap for gullible travelers." Carter straightened his tie with unsteady fingers. "Scientific curiosity. If this train operates on supernatural principles, I want to understand the mechanism." "Liar," Milo said suddenly. You want to use the watch. I've seen that look before. Greedy, desperate. Tension crackled between them. Dr. Carter's expression hardened. You know nothing about me or my intentions, boy. I know desperation when I see it, Milo shot back. My brother had that same look before he did something stupid on this train, like he was willing to cut off his own arm to get what he wanted. Your brother's poor decisions are not my concern, Carter replied, voice dropping to a dangerous temperature. Milo lunged forward, but I caught his arm mid-swing. He's not worth it, I whispered. Save your strength. We'll need it for whatever comes next. Out of nowhere, a heavy clank sounded deep within the train. The overhead lights dimmed to nearly nothing. An electric hush fell over everything. Not just quiet, but the absolute absence of sound. Even the train's ever-present rumble vanished, leaving only the thud of my heart. The silent hour had arrived. Rule number 6. During the silent hour, shut your eyes. I remembered the warning. Unseen watchers roam, eager to claim any gaze that dares linger on their unformed shapes. Shut them, Emma whispered urgently, her own eyes already closed. I squeezed my eyes shut, fighting the primal reflex to look for danger. Darkness pressed against my eyelids, yet somehow I sensed movement all around. Shapes sliding past too close for comfort. The soft sound of rasping, hollow breaths surrounded us. Something brushed my cheek. Not fingers or a hand, but something soft and feathered. Don't open your eyes. Footsteps padded nearby. I heard Dr. Carter's breath hitch, a sharp intake followed by a trembling exhale, as though fighting the urge to peek. A voice, low and insidious, whispered directly into my ear. Look at me, Danny. I have your father here. He's proud of you, finally proud. Just open your eyes and see. The voice was almost my father's, but wrong somehow. Too sweet, too kind. I clenched my jaw till my teeth ached. Another voice sounded nearby. Emma, your brother reached out for you. You abandoned him. He's still waiting just beyond the curtain. That voice was childlike, sing-song, with something else echoing behind it. Emma whimpered, the shuffle of her feet betraying her internal battle. I fought the urge to reach for her hand, afraid of losing my balance. Somewhere ahead, Milo made a choking sound. No, get away, he rasped. The footsteps circled us, accompanied by faint moans. Carter, a child's voice whispered, sweet and innocent. Daddy, why didn't you save me? Why did you let me die on your table? It hurt so much. A strangled gasp came from Dr. Carter's direction. Lily? He whispered, voice cracking. Don't open your eyes, Emma hissed. It's not her. Nothing here is what it claims. My chest hurts, Daddy, the child's voice continued, now wet with tears. You said you'd fix my heart. You promised. Carter's breathing became ragged. I tried, baby. God, I tried. Try again, the voice coaxed, suddenly closer. Look at me, Daddy. See where you went wrong. See what piece you missed. The words ended in wet, gurgling sounds. Danny, another voice whispered, hauntingly familiar, my father's academic tone. I've been watching your journey. I finally understand why quantum physics never interested you. I was blind to your gifts. I felt tears burning behind my closed eyelids. Even knowing it was a trick, the words pierced straight through my defenses. Then, a single cry rang out. Someone had faltered. Someone had looked. My stomach flipped. Who had opened their eyes to the watchers? But not long after that, the oppressive hush vanished. Sound rushed back in a dizzying wave, and I opened my eyes, blinking wildly. Milo stood pinned against the wall, eyes wide. Astrid, he gasped, pointing. She looked. She's gone. His finger stabbed at an empty space where she'd stood moments before. I spun around, expecting to see Astrid's tall figure. But the spot was empty. A smear of dark fluid stained the wall, trailing down to the floor. There, a single black hairpin lay bent into a strange shape. Carter's face went ashen. Emma pressed a hand to her mouth. Astrid, mysterious, clever Astrid, had vanished in the silent hour. probably snatched by whatever watchers she'd glimpsed in the darkness. "We can't help her," Emma said bleakly. "Anyone taken during the silent hour is gone, part of the train's collection now, like those specimens we saw." She kicked the hairpin away with her boot. Milo slid down the wall until he hit the floor. "She saved me," he croaked, words muffled by his palms. I almost looked. "She shoved me against the wall and told me to keep my eyes shut while she—" His words dissolved into ragged sobs. Dr. Carter frowned, knuckles whitening around the watch. "We can't let this horror break us. We must push on. Dawn might not be far off." Taking shallow breaths, we gathered ourselves. One less companion, one more mark of the train's cruelty. As we kept walking, I noticed Carter staring at his hands. "She wasn't real," he muttered, seemingly to himself. "What?" I asked. "The voice. It wasn't Lily." He looked up, eyes haunted. "My daughter had a heart defect, congenital. I wasn't—" He paused. "I would never have operated on my own child. That was the mistake in the illusion. No surgeon would—" His hand drifted to the watch in his pocket. "My colleague performed the surgery. My friend. The train doesn't always get the details right," Emma said softly. "It feeds on the emotion, not the facts. Like a predator that doesn't care what color its prey is, only that it bleeds." "Then what happened to your daughter?" Milo asked. Dr. Carter's face twisted with pain. "She died on another surgeon's table. My colleague. My friend." His voice hardened. "I should have been there. I should have done the procedure myself, regardless of ethics. At least then I could have—" "Blamed yourself directly?" I finished quietly. His eyes met mine, startled. Then he nodded once, sharply. "Yes." Somewhere in the distance a bell tolled. Not a real bell with metal and clapper, but a hollow echo that vibrated through the train's metal bones. "What was that?" Milo whispered. "The hour," Emma said, her face lifting toward a window where the faintest brightening of the sky was visible. "We're running out of time. This train only travels in darkness." Reaching beyond the maintenance corridor, we found a flight of metal steps leading upward, each one ringing hollow when our feet hit them. At the top, a narrow walkway stretched toward a door with flaking letters that spelled "Observation Deck." "An observation deck on a ghost train?" Milo muttered. "Fine. Let's see what we can observe. Maybe it shows us where this thing is taking us." We climbed the stairs. Emma clung to my arm with cold fingers. Dr. Carter strode ahead, the watch in his pocket ticking like a cicada's rhythm. At the top, the door creaked open, revealing a small enclosed balcony with windows all around, smudged with grime. A single overhead lamp swung gently. Outside, the sky stretched starless and empty, and black sheet that bled into the silhouettes of mountains or forests. A slender figure stood at the railing, a man in the midnight blue uniform we'd seen at the station, silver buttons catching light like fish scales underwater. The conductor. He turned to us, cap pulled low, over eyes I still couldn't quite see. What little I glimpsed of his face looked too pale, too smooth, like a porcelain doll. "Good evening," he murmured. "We approach a critical juncture. I trust your journey so far has been enlightening." An uneasy prickle crawled up my neck as rule number 1 flashed in my mind. Never accept the conductor's second request. Emma stiffened beside me. Milo hovered near the doorway. Dr. Carter, however, stepped forward with reckless confidence. "You're the conductor. Why does this train devour your passengers like some nightmare carnival ride?" he snapped. The conductor's thin lips curled into a brittle smile. "The Night Nocturne Express devours no one who follows the rules. But so few do." He tilted his head with mechanical precision. "You carry something that belongs to the train, do you not?" His gloved hand extended slightly. Carter's hand flew to the watch pocket. "This belongs to me," he said sharply. The conductor's gaze flicked to the pocket. "Ah, the captain's chronometer. It was lost to time, waiting to be reclaimed. You found it. You broke a rule in keeping it, yet it has not punished you." Yet, the watch's second hand clicked in rapid staccato beneath Carter's grip. Emma licked her lips. If it's part of the train, maybe returning it is the only way to end this nightmare. Carter whipped his head toward her, eyes narrowed. No, you don't understand what this can do. Something in his voice raised the hair on my arms. Carter, I said gently, just put it back. Don't risk. He whirled toward me, eyes blazing. I lost my daughter Lily 2 years ago. She died on my operating table. His voice shattered like glass. I lied to you. I was the surgeon. I broke every ethical principle to operate on my own child when her assigned surgeon fell ill. The hospital covered it up, a mercy for a broken man. His eyes now carried the weight of someone who'd rehearsed a confession 1,000 times. Emma's eyes softened. Milo stared at the floor. Carter continued, I've traveled the world seeking ways to bring her back. Peru, Tibet, even Haiti. It's madness, I know that. But when the merchant spoke of regrets, when I saw this train's power, I realized it might do the impossible. He turned the watch over in his palm. This can shift reality if harnessed correctly. I can save Lily. But at what cost? I asked. The conductor's mouth curved into a knife-edge grin. No one can cheat death without sacrifice. This is the oldest law. Carter's eyes glistened with unshed tears. I'd sacrifice anything. Anything. And if this cursed train can grant me that, so be it. The conductor extended a silver punch tool that gleamed in the lamplight. I can finalize your desire, Dr. Carter, with a second punch to your ticket. That will grant you the authority to attempt rewriting a single fate aboard this train. But, he added, the cost is permanent. You'd remain in service to the engine forever, or worse. His smile widened. Emma stepped forward. Carter, no. It's exactly what they want. To trap you, to feed on your sorrow like parasites on an open wound. If you had a child you loved, or a brother who vanished, or a father who overshadowed you, Carter said, meeting each of our gazes in turn, wouldn't you want the chance to fix it all? The conductor lifted his punch. Shall I punch your ticket, Carter? This was the second request, and the rule was clear. Never accept the conductor's second request. No, I said, stepping between them. Don't do it. We'll find another way. Carter's face twisted into something barely recognizable as human. No other way exists, Danny. What do I have left? My reputation is shot. My family is gone. You think your father's disapproval is painful. Try burying your daughter knowing your own hands killed her. This won't bring her back, Emma pleaded. Not really. The train twists everything like funhouse mirrors. Whatever returns won't be Lily. You don't know that, Carter hissed. I know because I tried, Emma shouted, tears streaming down her cheeks. That's why I came back to the train. For my brother. I thought I could save him. She shuddered. What came back wasn't my brother anymore. It had his face, his voice, but inside it was hollow. A puppet of the train, eyes dead as glass marbles. This revelation stunned us to silence. The conductor gazed on, patient as a vulture circling dying prey. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Carter, I'm sorry about Lily, but this train is a trap. Everyone who succumbs ends up lost, like moths flying into a flame. Carter's eyes flicked between us and the conductor, calculation replacing grief. His expression hardened with resigned resolve. All that matters is Lily. Punch it. And so the conductor pressed the punch to Carter's ticket with a sound like a snake striking. Click. The small hole it left glowed faintly around the edges, like embers eating paper from the inside out. A wave of cold air rushed through the deck. Carter gasped, swaying. Then he regained his balance, eyes shining with manic triumph. It's done, the conductor said softly. Now, the watch is your instrument, Dr. Carter. Use it before daybreak or lose your window. The train neither forgives nor grants second tries. And with that, the conductor stepped backward, dissolving into the shadows as though he'd never been solid at all. We stood frozen as Carter clutched the watch with white-knuckled fingers. Emma and Milo stared at him like he'd grown horns. He had accepted the second request. The worst of our nightmares had just begun. We rushed down from the observation deck, metal stairs clanging beneath our feet. Carter led the way, moving with frantic certainty. Milo grabbed my sleeve. "He's going to break every rule if it helps him," he hissed. "We can't trust him now. He's like a drowning man. He'll pull us all down with him." Emma looked stricken. "He's not evil, just desperate. But the train feeds on that desperation, the way moss feeds on a rotting log." Our surroundings shifted with every door we passed through. One minute we roamed an art-decorated lounge with velvet chairs. The next we stepped onto rotting floorboards of a carriage that reeked of fish guts and sea salt. I couldn't shake the sensation that the train was physically rearranging itself around us. Doors we'd passed through once opened to entirely different cars when we returned. "Where are we going?" I demanded when Carter paused at a crossroads where corridors bled into darkness in 3 directions. He turned to face us, the watch ticking in his fist, "To the place where the train's power is strongest." I can sense it pulling me like a magnet. His eyes had changed since the observation deck. The pupils dilated, almost swallowing the iris. "And after you do your little ritual, what's left for us?" Milo asked. Carter's face hardened. "Either you help me, or stay out of my way." His free hand slipped into his pocket, fingers caressing something that glinted beneath his coat. A surgical scalpel. Emma planted herself between us. "Please, Dr. Carter. You're not the only one who's lost everything to get here. Don't throw us all to the wolves for your own salvation." Her plea seemed to pierce through his single-minded focus. "What happened to your brother?" he asked, voice softer. She inhaled shakily. "Car accident. He was 16. I was driving. I took my eyes off the road for just a second to change the radio station. We hit a tree at 60 miles an hour. When I found this train the first time, the merchant offered me a chance to bring Marco back. I accepted without asking the price." "And?" Carter pressed, the watch ticking faster in his hand. "The train demanded a sacrifice," she whispered. "Another passenger volunteered, an old woman who'd lost her husband 30 years before. The passenger disappeared into the white drapes, and something wearing my brother's skin emerged. It looked like him, talked like him, but..." She shuddered. "When it smiled, there was nothing behind its eyes. It moved wrong, like something learning to use human limbs by studying diagrams." Carter seemed genuinely affected by her story, his clinical detachment cracking. For a heartbeat, I saw conflict warring across his features. Then his fingers tightened around the watch. "I'll do it better," he said finally. "I'm a surgeon. Precision is my specialty. I won't make the same mistakes." And he pressed on, refusing to slow, the watch pulling him forward like a divining rod to water. We had no choice but to follow or be stranded in a labyrinth that kept remaking itself. Eventually, the corridor opened into a mirror-lined hall. The same ornate frames now pulsed with light, each reflection subtly wrong. In one, I glimpsed myself with hollow eye sockets. In another, my skin seemed to crawl with something beneath it. "Count the rows of mirrors, but never stop at the 9th, Emma whispered. "Rule number 2. Dr. Carter marched ahead, ignoring the caution. I grabbed his arm. "Don't. We risk losing ourselves in these reflections. They're gateways, not mirrors." He shook me off. "My time is limited, Jackson. You can tremble behind me if you like." Emma began counting the mirrors under her breath. 1, 2, 3. We passed the first row, carefully averting our eyes from the glass. 5, 6, 7, Emma continued. 8. Hurry. A corner loomed ahead, the corridor turning sharply left, and on that corner wall stood the 9th mirror, larger than the others. "Don't look. Just walk past it," Emma choked, covering her eyes with spread fingers. But Dr. Carter slowed, his body turning toward the glass as if pulled by strings. The 9th mirror glimmered with an inner light. He lifted the watch until it was level with his eyes. "She's in there," he whispered. "Lily's reflection. She's reaching for me. A child's handprint appeared on the inside of the glass, small fingers splayed as if pressed against a window. "Keep going," I hissed, tugging at his sleeve. "It's not her. It's the mirror trying to trap you." Carter's foot slid forward. "I see you, Lily," he breathed. A groaning hiss sounded from the mirrored surfaces. Emma grabbed Carter's other arm. "Break the rule now, and we'll lose you. Lily's not. She can't be." He jerked free, his gaze wild. Then somehow he forced himself to step away from the glass. The watch's face flared with an eerie blue-green glow, and the reflection receded. We rushed past the corner, not stopping at the 9th mirror. A bestial growl echoed behind us, but we didn't look back. Emma stumbled into my side, gasping for air. "We survived the mirrors," she said, half in relief, half in horror. A thin trickle of blood ran from her nose. Milo sagged against a wall. I saw a reflection of my brother, as if he was the one who'd survived, not me. He swallowed audibly. "Everyone thinks he died in the fire, but it was me. I was trapped in the bedroom when the ceiling collapsed. He went back in to save me." His voice cracked. "I don't know how, but we switched. I woke up outside, watching my body being pulled from the ruins, except it wasn't me anymore." He looked at Emma with recognition. "That's why I understood what you meant about the thing wearing your brother's skin." His fingers traced the burn scar on his wrist, the only part of me that remembers what I was before. The revelation sent chills down my spine. Another soul marked by the train's meddling with what should and shouldn't be. The corridor ahead opened into a new chamber, lit by floating orbs that hung in the air like jellyfish suspended in dark water. The Phantom Merchant's domain. We stepped into the merchant's lair, each of us carrying our broken stories like talismans against the night. The chamber stretched out before us, surrounded by velvet curtains the color of fresh blood that seemed to breathe. The merchant stood in the center, his brass cart gleaming under the strange light. He turned as we entered, hood shifting to reveal only a papery chin and those teeth. "Good evening once more," he greeted. "I sense you carry greater urgency now, dear travelers. And tension. Betrayal. Perhaps." His yellowed fingers danced over his wares, crystal vials, jewelry tarnished green as old pennies, ancient books bound in something that looked disturbingly like human skin. Dr. Carter marched toward the hooded figure, the watch clutched in his fist. "Merchant," he said, his voice cracking, "I need the knowledge to use this watch, to rewrite a life, to save my daughter." A creeping dread spread through my limbs. "Carter," I pleaded, "don't." My voice cut off suddenly, as if invisible hands had wrapped around my windpipe. The merchant's lips curved upward, the smile of a predator. "You have the watch, the second punch from our mutual associate. All that remains is the method. I alone can impart that knowledge." Dr. Carter stood rigid. "Name your price." Milo shot me a look of pure panic. Carter was about to break rule number 3 in the worst way possible. Not just greeting the merchant, but actually buying what he offered. The hooded figure rolled up his sleeves, revealing arms thin as winter branches, with yellow skin stretched too tight over bone. "The cost is your capacity for human connection. You will become cold as the scalpel you wield, precise but unfeeling." Carter's breath caught. "That's your price? My emotions?" "Indeed. The part of you that feels empathy, love, compassion. Such illusions only hamper your quest. Surrender them, and you'll gain the skill to manipulate the watch if your will holds strong enough." Emma leapt forward, grabbing Carter's sleeve. "That's insane. Don't do it. Lily wouldn't want to come back to a father who's lost his ability to love her." Carter flinched at her words, doubt flickering across his face. Then, as if some internal argument had been settled, he extended the watch toward the merchant. "I'll do it," he whispered. "Stop!" I shouted, lunging forward, but I was too slow. The merchant placed a bony hand over Carter's chest. A swirl of pale mist emerged from beneath the doctor's shirt, seeping out like breath on a winter morning. Dr. Carter gasped, stumbling backward, his face twisting as something vital was torn free from inside him. As a low moan left his throat, the merchant pulled away, that mist sliding into a crystal vial he produced from his cart. The transaction was done, the price paid in full. Carter straightened, his face the color of chalk dust. His eyes, which had once carried grief as visible as bruises, now looked empty. "Show me," he said tonelessly. The merchant's fingers traced symbols in the air that seemed to linger, leaving trails of light. Wind the watch backward, 3 complete revolutions at the stroke before sunrise. Draw a circle of your blood, fresh from the vein. The train's power shall obey your will for 1 life, but fail to finish the ritual before the sun fully crests the horizon, and the watch will claim you instead. Carter's lips twitched in a grin that held no joy. Understood. A hush settled over us as the merchant replaced the file on his cart. Then he turned to face the rest of us. "Will any of you also purchase?" he asked softly. "No," Emma rasped, her hand clutching her brother's key charm tightly. Milo shook his head. I forced out the formula. "We greet you, but we do not buy." The merchant's hooded form tilted. "Are you certain, Daniel Jackson? Your father's respect eludes you like water through cupped hands. I could help you earn it, make it permanent." My heart stuttered in my chest. "What do you mean?" Beneath the hood, I sensed a smile spread. "The great Dr. Jackson never valued you because he couldn't see himself in you. His brilliance, his logical perfection. I could change that, give you the mind to match his, to surpass him even. He would finally see your worth, finally speak your name with the same pride he reserves for his equations." The offer sliced through my defenses like a hot knife through butter. I'd spent my entire life starving for my father's approval. Memories flooded back. Science fairs where he checked his watch instead of looking at my display. Graduation speeches where he answered emails on his phone. Dinner conversations where he corrected my understanding of basic physics until I stopped talking altogether. What would it cost? The words tumbled from my mouth before I could catch them. "Danny, no." Emma grabbed my arm, her fingernails digging into my skin. The merchant's voice felt warm. "Just your creativity. The parts of you that rebel against pure logic and reason. Your messy, emotional, human intuition. A fair exchange, is it not? You lose the chaotic thoughts that distance you from your father and gain his lifelong admiration." His hand hovered over a crystal orb filled with patterns of light and dark. I stood frozen, suddenly seeing myself through a new lens. Sitting across from my father at his steel and glass dining table, engaging in brilliant discourse about quantum fields, while he nodded with newfound respect. The fantasy was so vivid, it felt like memory. "Greetings, merchant," I forced out, each word requiring effort like pushing through mud. "I do not buy." The words cost me more than I'd ever admit aloud, each syllable carrying the weight of surrender, of acknowledging that my father's approval might forever remain beyond my reach. The merchant gave a theatrical sigh. "Then may you find comfort in your suffering." He bowed with exaggerated courtesy before simply melting into the crimson curtains behind him, taking his cart with him. Emma sank to her knees, tears slipping free. He's gone. Dr. Carter's empathy, just gone. She reached for the doctor, fingers outstretched, but he stepped away. Milo stared at Carter warily. What now? Carter turned to us, his face cold as marble. Now, I wait for sunrise. I draw that circle, I wind the watch, and Lily returns. Do not interfere. That final sentence carried a warning as clear as if he'd pressed his scalpel to our throats. My blood ran cold at the realization. Whatever walked in Carter's skin now was no longer fully human. Thank you, I whispered to Emma, who still gripped my arm, for stopping me when I almost... The merchant doesn't sell what we want. He sells what we think we want, she said softly. There's a difference, a canyon-wide gap between the two. She squeezed my arm. The words settled in my chest. Even as we followed Carter down the corridor, I thought about what I truly wanted. Was it really my father's approval? Or something deeper? a sense of my own worth, independent of his judgment. But philosophical questions would have to wait for safer times. We had a more immediate problem. Dr. Carter was now emotionally hollow, armed with a supernatural watch, and determined to perform a ritual that could kill us all. The scalpel gleamed in his hand like a silver tooth, all while the Night Nocturne Express rattled onward through darkness, taking us toward sunrise and whatever terrible rebirth awaited there. As Carter stormed ahead, the three of us traded glances that said everything words couldn't. "He's going to do something we can't undo," Emma whispered, twisting her brother's key charm between trembling fingers. We followed him into a first-class lounge where dawn's first gray light leaked through smudged windows. Carter knelt on the floor, carving a perfect circle with his scalpel. His hands moved with the practiced precision of someone who'd cut into human flesh 1,000 times before. "I need blood for this," he said flatly, rolling up his sleeve to reveal a road map of surgical scars crisscrossing his forearm. "Think about what you're doing," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "If Lily comes back, she'll be trapped on this nightmare train. Look what it's already done to you." Carter looked through me with eyes as empty as drained swimming pools. Better she exist here than nowhere. Without flinching, he sliced his palm open. Blood dripped into the carved circle, where it sizzled against the wood like water on a hot skillet. From the shadowy corners, silent figures gathered to watch. The conductor stood by the wall, stiff as a mannequin. The merchant lurked near a velvet curtain, hood hiding all but the gleam of his teeth. "We need to stop him," Milo muttered, his fingers wrapping around a heavy glass ashtray. Before any of us moved, a familiar silhouette darkened the doorway. Astrid, or what was left of her after the silent hour claimed her. She glided in, her green coat still crisp and perfect. But her eyes had changed, black from lid to lid, like someone had poured oil into them. "You made it," Milo gasped, stepping toward her before Emma caught his arm. "Something's wrong," Emma hissed, barely above a whisper. Astrid smiled like someone who'd learned human expressions from a manual. "I've returned with purpose," she said, staring not at us but at the watch in Carter's bloodied hand. "The chronometer needs guidance," she continued, drifting closer. "The merchant only told you half the story. Let me help." Her voice mimicked Astrid's accent, but underneath ran something ancient and hungry. Carter paused, the watch gleaming wetly in his palm. "The merchant said nothing about needing help. The merchant only shares what serves his deals," Astrid replied, her eyes never leaving the watch. "I've walked these corridors long enough to know the train's true nature." "Don't listen," I warned. "That's not Astrid anymore." She turned those oil-slick eyes to me. "You've always seen too clearly, Danny Jackson. Your father had the same gift, seeing so much it drove people away." Carter had already begun turning the watch backward, each click echoing like a gunshot in a cathedral. Astrid watched with growing tension, patience evaporating. When he finished the second turn, she snapped. "Give me the watch," she demanded, her voice suddenly layered like a chorus of speakers. "You can't finish this alone." Carter clutched it tighter. "This is my ritual. My daughter." Astrid's mask cracked completely. "The chronometer belongs to the captain," she snarled, lunging with inhuman speed. Her fingers stretched like melting wax as she grabbed for the watch. Milo seized his chance, swinging the ashtray at Carter's arm. But Carter moved with cold efficiency, dodging Astrid and shoving Milo to the floor without losing his grip on the watch. I dove into the fray as Emma shouted a warning. The scalpel flashed, opening a line of fire across my forearm. Blood bloomed along the cut as Carter stepped back into his circle, determined to finish what he'd started. "The captain's chronometer was never yours," Astrid hissed, dropping any pretense of humanity. "It returns to its rightful master." Carter ignored her, making the final turn of the watch. He pressed it to the bloody circle, his face locked in the desperate hope of a man who'd gambled everything on one last roll of the dice. "Lily," he whispered, the name falling from his lips like the last prayer of a dying man. The watch erupted with pale light that wrapped around Carter like a burial shroud. The train lurched violently, and windows shattered, letting in wind that smelled of freshly dug graves and rusted metal. Inside the column of light, a small figure took shape, childlike, with copper curls that caught the glow like autumn leaves in sunset. For one breathless moment, hope flickered in the room. Then the figure changed. Its innocent face split along invisible seams. Where a child's smile should have been, concentric rings of teeth gleamed like a shark's maw. The creature let out a sound that bypassed our ears entirely, vibrating directly against our skulls. "That's not Lily," Emma gasped, horror twisting her face. It never was. The creature collapsed inward, reforming as gnarled black vines that moved with purpose. Recognition dawned in Carter's empty eyes. Too late. The entity wrapped around him like a lover's last embrace. Thorn-like protrusions punctured his chest as he screamed, not the controlled cry of someone who understands pain, but the primal howl of a soul being torn apart. Then, with a sound like wet fabric tearing, Carter and the creature vanished into the vortex. The watch fell to the carpet, broken into pieces that caught the dawn light. Astrid gathered the fragments with reverent hands. "The captain reclaims what was always his," she murmured. She turned those oil-black eyes toward us. "The train still hungers. Dawn approaches. You must choose." She vanished between one heartbeat and the next, taking the watch pieces with her. Where Carter had stood remained only a blood-soaked photograph of a little girl with copper curls in her father's eyes. Suddenly, the train's whistle cut through the silence, a single mournful note that seemed to bridge worlds. The conductor materialized beside the door, his uniform pristine despite the chaos. "We approach the terminus," he announced. "Departing is optional, but decide before full sunrise." Milo helped me to my feet as Emma stared at the corridor beyond, where white drapes hung in soft folds. Her expression had changed, a terrible longing replacing her earlier resolve. "We're getting off," Milo said firmly. "All of us." But Emma shook her head, eyes fixed on the curtains. "I hear him," she whispered. "My brother. He's calling from behind the drapes." Her voice echoed, as if she spoke from the bottom of a well. "Emma," I said gently, taking her ice-cold hand. "Remember what you told us. Whatever waits there isn't Marco anymore." "But what if some part of him is still there?" she asked, tears brimming. "What if I could free him this time?" The conductor's smile widened slightly. "The white drapes welcome those with unfinished business," he said. Before I could respond, an invisible force yanked Emma toward the curtained corridor. She screamed, fingernails scraping furrows in the wooden floor as the train exerted its will. The silver key charm tore from her wrist, landing with a musical chime. I grabbed her, trying to anchor her against the pull, but the force was relentless. The white curtains parted on their own, reaching for her like pale fingers. "Danny," she cried, her eyes wide with terror and resignation. "Hold on," I shouted, but her fingers slipped through mine like water. She vanished behind billowing curtains that sealed themselves shut, leaving nothing but silence. I lurched toward them, ready to follow, but Milo caught my arm. "You know the rule," he said, voice cracking. "Never enter the white drapes alone." The conductor watched our struggle with clinical interest. "You risk so much for someone you've known only hours, Mr. Jackson." "She matters," I replied simply. "Perhaps an exchange could be arranged," the conductor suggested. "One passenger may take another's place if freely offered." Milo stepped forward before I could stop him. "I'll go," he said, bending to retrieve Emma's fallen key charm. "I understand what she's feeling, the guilt of surviving when someone you love didn't." "The boy offers himself," the conductor noted with detached curiosity. "Not to the train," Milo clarified. "To help Emma find peace. There's a difference." The curtains parted once more. Milo turned to me, his young face suddenly ancient with purpose. "If we're not back when the train stops, get off without us. Someone needs to remember what happened here." He pressed the key charm into my palm, the metal warm from his grip. "Promise me." I nodded, throat too tight for words. Milo walked into the white drapes with deliberate steps, his silhouette fading until nothing remained but gently swaying fabric. The train slowed as it approached a deserted platform. Atzburn halt, according to a rusted sign hanging by a single bolt. Through grimy windows, I saw morning mist rolling across cracked concrete. I stood alone by the exit door, the key charm clutched in my palm like a talisman. The conductor appeared beside me, his perfect, unsettling smile in place. "We have arrived, Mr. Jackson. The doors will remain open for 30 seconds. After that, the night nocturne continues its journey." I stared down the corridor toward the white drapes, hoping against reason that my companions would emerge. "Please," I said, hating the pleading in my voice. "Let them go." The conductor spread his gloved hands. "The train releases only those who truly wish to leave. Some passengers discover they belong here more than in the world beyond." Just as despair threatened to drown me, the white drapes began to ripple violently. The fabric tore with a sound like silk ripping, and Milo stumbled through. His face was the color of chalk, his clothes in tatters. "Milo!" I rushed to steady him. "Where's Emma?" He shook his head, the gesture containing volumes of grief. "She found what looked like her brother. She won't leave him, Danny. I tried everything." His voice cracked as he pressed the silver key into my hand. "She made her choice." The train whistle sounded again. One long note followed by two short ones. Final warning. As we moved toward the exit, a voice called from behind us. Emma's voice, but changed somehow, carrying extra tones that no human throat should make. "Danny, wait!" She stood at the far end of the corridor, not alone. Beside her loomed a figure that resembled her brother. The same features she'd described, the birthmark shaped like Italy still visible on his temple. But his skin was the color of spoiled milk, his joints too fluid as he draped an arm possessively around her shoulders. "Come with us," I pleaded. "That's not him, Emma. You know that." A sad smile crossed her face. "I know what he is," she admitted. "But I abandoned him once. I can't do it again." Something in her eyes had already begun to change. A glassiness, as if part of her was dissolving into the train's hungry depths. "Some of us aren't meant to escape our ghosts, Danny. This is where I belong." The creature beside her smiled. Yet Emma showed no fear as she leaned into its embrace. "She has made her choice," the conductor said softly, "and you must make yours." The doorway stood open, morning light spilling across. So with leaden steps, Milo and I crossed onto the platform, the concrete jarringly solid beneath our feet. I turned back in time to see Emma raise one hand in farewell, before she and the thing wearing her brother's skin faded into the train's shadows. The door sealed shut with a sound like fate being decided, and the locomotive pulled away into the morning mist. We stood watching until the last car disappeared around a bend, taking with it all evidence of our nightmare. The key charm felt heavy in my pocket, a small piece of Emma that had escaped the train's hunger. As we turned to leave, a familiar vibration returned to the air. The train had reappeared on the tracks, as if it had never left. The door opened to reveal a figure with Carter's face, but something else behind his eyes. Where his heart should have been, gaped a perfect circular hole, its edges smooth as if carved by a master craftsman. "Did you truly think escape would be so simple?" he asked, his voice echoing with unnatural clarity. "You're the captain," I said, the truth settling into my bones. He inclined his head, one hand gesturing to the void in his chest. "Carter made an excellent vessel. His grief gives such flavor to this existence." "You planned everything," I accused. "The watch, the rules, it was all to feed your train. The night nocturne requires nourishment," he replied simply. "Each passenger brings a unique emptiness. Yours for a father's approval, Milo's for a life he shouldn't have, Emma's for a brother she couldn't save." He studied us with ancient eyes that had witnessed endless sorrows. "You survived, Danny Jackson, because I allowed it. Someone must carry the tale to others who might seek passage. The lonely, the grieving, those with hollows inside them that echo when called into." I shook my head. "I won't do your recruiting." The captain smiled. "You already have. The story takes shape in your mind even now, like frost creeping across a window." His gaze softened slightly. The rules were real, by the way. Not to protect you, but to guide transformation. Some become stories. Others, like Emma, become companions. The fortunate ones become part of the train itself. And Lily? I couldn't help asking. Was she ever real? A shadow passed over the captain's borrowed face. Perhaps the last human emotion left to him. As real as the grave where Carter buried her. His memories have become mine now. I feel the weight of his scalpel in my hand, taste the salt of his tears. Some wounds transcend even immortality. The door closed and the train departed once more, this time vanishing completely into the morning fog. Milo and I stood silent on that abandoned platform until he finally said what we both feared. It's not over. We made our way to the nearest town, a cluster of stone buildings that seemed to huddle against the morning chill. People there recognized something in our eyes, a haunted quality perhaps, because they asked no questions when we requested directions to the nearest bus station. We parted with an embrace that carried the weight of shared nightmares, exchanging phone numbers like talismans against the darkness we'd witnessed. "I'm going back to find what's left of my brother," Milo said, his young face lined with premature wisdom. "Not to bring him back, just to make peace." I nodded, understanding completely. "And I think I need to go home." 6 months have passed since that night on the Nocturne Express. Spring has arrived in Massachusetts, where I returned after cutting my European wanderings short. The campus where my father teaches quantum physics hasn't changed. Brick buildings standing sentinel against time. Students crossing the quad with backpacks slung over their shoulders. Scarves fluttering in the chilly morning air. But I have changed, irreversibly. My aunt once told me that traveling helps you find yourself. Her words proved strangely true, though not in any way she could have imagined. In those wood-paneled corridors of that train, I discovered what drove me away from home, my hunger for a nod of approval that never came, the ache that sent me stumbling through European hostels and crowded markets without direction. The night nocturne had whispered promises to fill that ache for a terrible price. I keep Emma's brass key charm on my nightstand now. I've traced my thumb over its teeth so often that they've been polished smooth as river stones. Some nights, when the wind rattles my window frame, I swear I hear her voice carried through the gap, a sorrowful whisper that forms the syllables of my name. That small piece of metal grounds me when the train's memory creeps into my dreams, blurring what happened from what might have been. When I finally knocked on my father's office door 3 days after returning, I braced for the familiar tightening around his eyes. Instead, I found an older man, with silver threading through his dark hair, who looked up from a chalkboard of equations with something like relief. "Danny," he said simply, removing his reading glasses. "You're back." We sat in his cramped office where coffee rings stained journal articles. We talked until the janitor's keys jingled outside. Of course, I didn't tell him about the train, but I told him about feeling lost, about sleeping in hostels where the ceiling cracks formed maps to nowhere. "I thought you'd be disappointed that I wasn't following your path," I admitted finally. He studied me with eyes so similar to my own. "I've been buried in my work, perhaps too deeply." His fingers traced an equation on his desk, leaving ghostly marks. "But I never wanted you to be me, Danny. I wanted you to find certainty in something, the way I found it in physics. That night was the first small bridge across years of silence. We still speak different languages, his of quantum fields and uncertainty principles, mine of folklore and the stories people whisper in the dark, but we're learning to translate, one cup of Tuesday coffee at a time. I travel cautiously now, choosing buses or flights when possible. When I must take a train, I watch the conductor's eyes for that unnatural stillness, that absence of light reflecting back. Twice now, I've spotted yellow tickets appearing on empty station benches, only to vanish when someone walks between us. Maybe the train remembers those who slipped from its grasp. Milo and I text every few weeks, always the same question from him. "Still avoiding night trains?" My answer never changes. We found his brother's gravestone last month in a small cemetery outside Salzburg, though official records show that no one by that name was buried there. He left sunflowers anyway, his brother's favorite. I've enrolled in graduate studies focused on folklore and comparative mythology. My professors exchange glances when I insist on cross-referencing accounts of phantom trains that appear only at midnight across 6 different cultures. They don't understand that some stories aren't fiction, but warning signs. Their details carved by survivors with shaking hands. After all, last week, I found a slip of paper tucked between pages of my leather-bound journal, a familiar yellow ticket I know I didn't put there. On its back, in elegant script that seemed to shift under my gaze, were 5 words that sent ice through my veins. Some captains never abandon ship. I burned it under a moonless sky, watching flames consume the paper with unusual hunger. And yet, no matter what I do, the Night Nocturne Express continues its journey through darkness. And to be honest with you, I sometimes miss it, because despite my personal growth, the hollow space behind my ribs hasn't disappeared. Perhaps no human exists without such empty chambers. Maybe that emptiness is simply part of being alive, not something to be filled at any cost, but to be acknowledged, like the pauses between notes in my father's favorite violin symphony. That's the end of this story. If you enjoyed the video, subscribing to my channel would help me out more than you can imagine. I appreciate you, and I'll see you soon.